And one of my hobbies is investigating the implications of the labor theory of value and, well, kind of Marxist issues in general, but lately it's been this issue in particular, namely the question of does capitalism have an inherent tendency towards breakdown and crisis and grinding to a halt, basically? That's the question I want to look at today, and also the question then of, if it does have a tendency towards this, is there anything we can do about it? Are there any changes we can make to the economic system to overcome any sort of crisis, any sort of mathematical crisis that we run into with capitalist reproduction? Now, this video will make a whole lot more sense to you if you are familiar already with labor theory of value, and in particular, also, especially if you're familiar with well, these two blogs, which have been very influential to my thinking lately. This one, A Critique of Crisis Theory, .wordpress.com, very interesting Marxist economics website. And also this one, therealmovement.wordpress.com, also very interesting and influential to my thinking lately. But in particular, the article that you should really familiarize yourself with before watching the rest of this video would be the short one by Henrik Grossman, written in 1929, entitled Law of the Accumulation and Breakdown, talking about capitalism's tendencies towards breakdown, as indicated by the labor theory of value. And I suppose I should mention at this point, for anyone who's watching who's not familiar with the labor theory of value or not on board with the labor theory of value, this video is probably not going to be of much interest to you unless you're at least willing to give the labor theory of value a fair shake. Most mainstream economists today do not, outright do not even give any credence at all to the labor theory of value. They don't see any way that it could possibly be true. Usually, most of them adhere to some sort of subjective utility theory of value, of why things have economic value. Marx's work, his labor theory of value, was part of a much older classical tradition in economics that goes back, in fact, to Adam Smith. There's not really as much divergence between Adam Smith and Karl Marx as you might think, as is traditionally assumed. Because Adam Smith himself was an early formulator of the labor theory of value, which got built upon by thinkers such as David Ricardo, especially. And then Marx is a part of that tradition. Of course, after Marx discovered some tendencies towards capitalist breakdown in the labor theory, according to the labor theory of value, the labor theory of value itself, and especially his interpretation of it, became very unpopular amongst the general public and economists in particular. And they scrambled to find economic theories that would make sense and would especially point away from the conclusion that capitalism had an inherent mathematical objective tendency towards breakdown and crisis. Mainstream economists are very uncomfortable with that idea. Now, you'll hear on many an occasion the admission that, oh sure, capitalism has many incidental reasons for crisis. It might be that capitalist business owners are getting quote unquote too greedy, let's say, or workers are getting too greedy, or there's low consumer confidence, all sorts of subjective factors, incidental factors that they might talk about from time to time on the news, but you'll very rarely hear them talk about a mathematical objective tendency towards breakdown in capitalist reproduction. And that's partly because their system doesn't entail that. You really have to look to the labor theory of value to understand where people with the idea might be coming from. Because if you look at the labor theory of value, if you look at these reproduction tables that, for example, Henrik Grossman and Otto Bauer, some of these Marxist thinkers back then, well, especially Grossman was a Marxist thinker, I should clarify, where they've taken the rules of the labor theory of value, the variables and the mathematical equations of it, and seeing how the system evolves over time. What Grossman finds in this article that you should check out before watching future parts of these videos. What he found is that there's this tendency towards what I've been calling breakdown, which is to say you reach a situation where the capitalist runs out of the incentive to keep hiring more people and employing more machinery. Capitalism is supposed to be a progressive economic system. That is to say, it's something that brings about progress. It brings about development of productivity, increased wealth over time. That's its great, reason for being. That's the reason why, we all, put up with it, with its occasional problems, is because it still has this promise, we are told, over time of, developing productivity and, bringing about greater wealth over time. And Marx himself was willing to admit that that is true up to a certain point. He was very much an admirer of capitalism, especially as it stood relative to earlier, more stagnant economic and social systems, such as a social system where the key to obtaining greater wealth is to conquer your neighbor's land, sort of a zero-sum game, as you might say, where what one person wins in greater land, the other person loses. There's no overall growth of productivity. Instead, you have warlords, kings, fighting over land and peasants that they can exploit without actually developing the productivity of that land or those peasants. In Marx's view, capitalism was a great system precisely because it got itself out of this morass of zero-sum games and actually developed the productivity of labor, developed the means of production. But Marx found through his reasoning that this tendency towards progressive development of the means of production, employing ever greater numbers of laborers and ever more machinery, that this would have a mathematical limit, regardless of what any of the any of the agents, any of the participants in this economic system wanted. Even if capitalists made a concerted effort to not be greedy, quote unquote, even if workers were restrained in their ambitions, still capitalism would come up against certain limits. There's a mathematical objective certainty, according to Marx and his understanding of the labor theory of value. And Henrik Grossman further reinforced this finding by showing it in numerical form in these reproduction tables, where he comes to a point after year 36 in this case of this capitalist reproduction system, where the capitalist no longer has the economic incentive to employ the full population and his full capital, where suddenly there's left an idle reserve army of workers that cannot be profitably employed, and a reserve surplus capital that cannot be profitably employed, which seems like kind of a paradox. If you've got workers standing around and money that you could be using to hire them, why wouldn't a capitalist use that money to hire these workers? Well, as Grossman found, it has to do with the profit motive breaking down in capitalism, and that's exactly what I'll look at next time and how that happens.